Hello and welcome to part 2 in our intro to the Linux command line, files and redirection. This is just a basic Ubuntu box, and the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to use the git clone command and pull down all the example files. Then I'm just going to walk through the documentation that's actually out on GitHub. So if you visit that URL, that github.com, labs, intro to Linux CLI, you can look at the markdown file and follow right along. Otherwise, there'll be a link down below in the comments. So the very first thing we'll do, take a look at our working directory. And so we'll use the print working directory or pwd command. So that says we're in the root folder. Let me go ahead and clear the screen just to make this a little easier to follow. Print working directory, that says we're in the root folder. All right, so if we want to see what's in the root folder, we can use the ls command. And there we see we have an intro to Linux CLI folder, and that came across with that git clone that brought down all the sample files. Now, if I want to create a new folder, I can use makedir. Makedir, let's call it my new dir. And now let's use the ls command again, and now we see my new dir appears up there. If we want to change into that, we can do cd my new dir. And now let's print working directory, look at our current directory. There we go, or root my new dir. If we want to go back a level, cd space dot print working directory again, and there I am in my home folder. As the root user, I am in the /root folder. Inside the root directory, we see that we have two subdirectories. We have an intro to Linux CLI, we have my new dir. So let's create some files. We can use the touch command to create an empty file, creatively call it my file, and we can use a command called file to actually tell us what that is. Now, obviously we just created that, we know it's an empty file, but if there was something we downloaded or we're evaluating for the first time, the file command can be very useful to say, hey, is it ASCII text? Is it a binary blob? Do you recognize this file type? Not so interesting when it's an empty file, but it does point out that, hey, you just created an empty file. Let's create a copy of that. We use the cp command. So now let's look at ls. We see we have my file and my new file. Let's go ahead and delete the original now. We'll use the rm command for that. ls, now we just see we have my new file. Now if we wanted to move the file, we can use the mv command. We'll move my new file to my new dir. And now we see that the file has moved. Let's go ahead into my new dir and take a look. There we see it. Additionally, you can rename files. So if I wanted to move my new file to my new file name, notice I didn't really specify a target directory. I just specified a new file name for it, so that effectively renames the file. If I want to validate my working directory, say, hey, where am I in the file system? Use print working directory and see that I'm in root my new directory. Well, one little trick you can use, wherever you are in the file system, you can do cd space and the squiggle or the tilde, depending on how you learn that one. Hit enter, and that will bring you back to your home folder. So it doesn't matter if I'm on the root folder or anywhere else, it'll just bring you back to the home folder. So that's kind of helpful. So now that we're in our home folder, let's take a look at the contents of that. So we've got the intro to Linux CLI folder that we cloned from GitHub. And let's go in there. Oops. You can use tab to complete that. And so in the intro to Linux CLI, we've got a bunch of different subfolders. We're on module 2, which is files and redirection. So in files and redirection, we have a couple different sample files. We have the markdown file that's got the actual commands that we're walking through, and then we've got cars1.markdown or md and cars2.md. So let's use the cat command, or which is short for concatenate, and that's going to show us the contents of the file here. So we cat cars1.md, we see a list of 25 cars. So these are the cars from Gone in 60 Seconds. So let me go ahead and clear the screen real quick. Let's take a look at our files. We also have a cars2.md. So let's cat cars2.md. So here we see cars 26 through 50. So if you guys remember that movie, there was 50 cars total they had to steal. So the entire list is split into 2 files. So the cat command is helpful for basically taking the text file as input and displaying the contents as standard output. And we'll get into that concept of standard in and standard out a little bit further. But we can also use cat for what it's short for, which is concatenate. So we can combine these 2 files into a third file. So if I look at our current folder structure, we have a cars1.md and cars2.md. So cars 1 through 25 in cars1.md, cars 25 through 50, I'm sorry, 26 through 50 in cars2.md. So let's combine those 2. Say cat cars1.md and cars2.md, and we are going to output that into cars3.md. Now let's use the cat command to show us what's in cars3.md. And here we see we have all 50. Now the way that this is displaying, we don't have a line count where we can see 50 lines at once. So there's a couple different commands that we'll use for that. So we can use the less command. Ooh, if I can type. And so the less command pauses, so it's showing us everything that'll fit on the screen, and if I hit the space bar, it advances to the next screen. So that's very useful. If we don't want to go through the entire file, sometimes if you're looking at log files or huge files, it's a little cumbersome to go through all of it. We might want to look at just the top 10. So we can use head cars3.md, and there's just the top 10 lines. We see, the first line, cars from gone 60 seconds, empty line, and then the first 8. And if we want to look at the last 10 lines, we can use tail. And that shows us the last 10 lines. So that's great when you're trying to look at something like a log file and you're really only interested in the last couple of entries. We showed the cat command earlier that would display the contents of our files. And we use the cat command to combine 2 files into 1 file. But I used a greater than symbol to do that. So I want to talk about that a little bit because that starts to talk about the concept of redirection. So let's look at the files again here. So if I clear the screen and I list our files off. So let's look at cars1. And in cars1, we have 1 through 25. So now I'm specifying cat cars1.md. So I'm telling the program cat that cars1.md is the file that we're working with, and it's going to use that as input, and it's using the screen as output. And so it's taking the file in, it's displaying it, and outputting that to the screen. Now the concept of redirection is very important in Linux and Unix-based operating systems. It really allows us to control what our programs are doing and where they're sending data. Sometimes it's just text. It might even be network connections and binary data, but we'll start off with just text. So I used the greater than before, and we'll use that again, and that will actually take everything and redirect this, and we'll redirect it into a file. Now we could redirect it a bunch of different places, but just to keep things easy, we'll do it into a file. So cat cars1.md, again, enter. We see it's all up on the screen. I'm just gonna hit up arrow, pull my command up again, and now I'm gonna create another more cars.md. And what I've done is I've redirected the output to that new file. And so let's look at more cars.md. There's our file. So if I was to run that same command again, cat cars1.md and greater than more cars.md, well, what do you think is going to happen? I am going to run the same command. It's going to generate the same output, and it's going to redirect it to that same file name. So if I look at more cars.md, it looks exactly the same. Well, now what if I wanted to append and not replace the contents of my file? So we used cat to output the contents of cars1.md to more cars.md, and cars1 had cars 1 through 25. So now let's use cat and append the content of cars2, which if you remember, that was cars number 26 through 50. So to append, we're just going to use 2 greater thans. And that will tell the operating system to take the standard output and append it to the file that we're specifying, which is morecars.md. So now we can use cat, and hopefully this will display enough to show what we want to show here. Yeah, we can see this. So we have, obviously the whole thing doesn't fit on the screen, but you can see we're up in number 17 at the top, down to 50. If we use the less command, remember, that's another way to display larger files. And there's 1 through 32 and 17 through 50. So we're able to use the standard output and redirect that to files. So remember, 1 greater than will overwrite and 2 will append.